It is February 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The air is thick with the scent of burning oil and pulverized sand. The American soldier, still wet behind the ears of a brutal mechanized war, is learning a terrifying lesson about armored combat. Altitude, ground level. Date, 17th of February 1943. The sun, a blinding disk over the Atlas Mountains, illuminated the brutal, cold reality of the battlefield. The sound of American armor advancing was less a roar and more a tentative, grinding cough. Then came the retort, deep and concussive. German 80mm anti-tank guns, instruments of surgical destruction. The new American weapon, the M10 tank destroyer, was supposed to be the answer. Its turret, open to the sky, a canvas-covered vulnerability, was a declaration of its doctrine, speed and maneuver over armor. But here, against the seasoned veterans of the Afrika Korps, this philosophy was proving fatal. The M10 was born of desperation and a peculiar strategic dogma. Unlike the tank, designed to survive a hit, the tank destroyer's mission was to never be hit. It was meant to hunt, ambush and kill at long range, relying on its 3-inch, 76 2mm gun and its speed to melt away before the enemy could retaliate. Yet on the unforgiving plains of Tunisia, where the enemy rarely adhered to the script, the M10 was being exposed for its weaknesses. The thin, sloped armor, capable of deflecting small arms, was useless against the high-velocity, shaped-charged tungsten of the German tanks. We saw them for the first time that day, the legendary Tigers. Their shape was a physical manifestation of fear. We were told to hit them in the side or rear, but they rarely afforded us that luxury. They moved with a chilling, calculated superiority. The great contradiction. The doctrine was sound. Tanks break the line, tank destroyers kill the tanks, but the implementation was disastrous. The M10, with its tall silhouette and open top, was dubbed a tin can on tracks by the very men ordered to crew it. They looked at the Sherman tank, with its fully enclosed turret and perceived robustness, and felt a profound sense of irony. They were the dedicated tank killers, yet they felt like the most vulnerable piece on the board. A young American commander, Lieutenant Jake Harmon, watched helplessly as a fellow M10 burst into a pillar of smoke and flame, the round having passed clean through its side hull. Harmon, historical account. It felt like we were piloting targets. The 88 was hitting us from distances where we couldn't even spot them. We were fast, yes, but speed doesn't stop a round already on its way. That open top. It was supposed to give us better vision, but all it gave us was a clear view of how high the smoke was rising from the wreckage of our friends. But Kasserine was the furnace that forged the American army in the European theater. It forced a brutal, immediate reappraisal of tactics. The doctrine wouldn't change, but the application of the doctrine had to. The M10 was fundamentally a defensive weapon, an ambusher. It was not a brawler. If the Americans were to survive the coming campaigns, they had to embrace the M10's true purpose, a predator waiting patiently in the brush. The Axis forces were openly contemptuous. They saw the M10 not as a threat, but as an amateur's attempt at anti-tank warfare. The Americans field these thinly skinned destroyers, thinking they can rely on luck and speed, scoffed one German panzer commander. But what they failed to grasp was the depth of American industrial power and the terrifying speed with which a motivated army could learn and adapt. The stage was set for the next confrontation, not in the wide-open desert, but in the constricted, unforgiving geography of Italy. The story of the M10 is just beginning. If you want more deep dives into the forgotten weapons and pivotal moments of history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. By the summer of 1943, the war had moved to the Mediterranean, transforming from a tank-on-tank desert duel into a brutal slugfest through mountains and valleys. Italy was a land of ancient roads, steep olive groves and choke points, a perfect environment for the ambush predator. The tank-destroyer doctrine scorned in the desert was about to find its home. The American and British forces had landed in Sicily and were moving up the Italian boot, encountering not just the German army, but their increasingly desperate Italian counterparts. The German command, acutely aware of the M10's vulnerability in a straight fight, began to exploit the open turret with mortar and artillery fire, viewing the crews as easy pickings. The M10 crew adapted by turning their weakness into an advantage. That open-top turret, offering a panoramic view, allowed the commander and crew to spot anti-tank positions and hidden threats far quicker than their buttoned-up German opponents. They trained obsessively on the art of shoot and scoot, firing their powerful 76mm round and displacing immediately, often within 30 seconds, before the enemy could trace the muzzle flash. This transition was born of necessity. The casualty rate in the tank destroyer battalions remained alarming. The human cost of the thin armor drove the men to invent new survival techniques. They began to utilize the terrain like a sniper uses cover, never firing from the same position twice, always positioning their vehicle behind a fold of the earth or a crumbling stone wall. Meanwhile, the Axis was fielding increasingly dangerous hardware. The Italian armored forces, though often lacking the heavy tanks of their German allies, relied on nimble, well-armed, self-propelled guns and robust medium tanks like the Semovente series and the formidable P-2640. These Italian units often acted as the rear guard and flank protectors for the Wehrmacht, proving to be deadly and experienced combatants in their native landscape. A captured German intelligence report from this period shows a shift in perception. Initial reports spoke only of the M10's lack of armor. Later reports, however, focused on its elusiveness. German Staff Officer, translated report, October 1943. The enemy uses these thinly skinned vehicles with a disturbing lack of predictability. They are appearing in forward positions, engaging our patrols with precision fire, and then vanishing into the dust. We lose a tank, and by the time we traverse our gun to the firing position, the Americans have already retreated 500 meters. They fight like guerrilla hunters, not like conventional armor. This was the M10 doctrine finally taking hold, firepower delivered by ghosts. In the hills near Cassino, a particularly aggressive Italian armored patrol, 3 Semovente 7518 assault guns and a supporting detachment of infantry, was moving to secure a key supply road. They moved with the overconfidence bred from months of relative success against softer Allied targets. The patrol commander, Captain Marco Rossi, was a veteran of the North African campaign. He dismissed the reports of American tank destroyers as exaggerated propaganda. Rossi, historical quote, adapted. "These Americans, they are slow learners. Their tank killers are flimsy. We will outmaneuver and outgun them. If they present a full silhouette, they are finished." What Rossi didn't know was that Lieutenant Harmon's reformed company, the same unit decimated at Kasserine, was waiting. They had learned to read the terrain, to anticipate the enemy's move, and to exploit the M10's powerful gun at ranges that minimized their own exposure. The tin can was now honing its teeth. The date is 10th of November, 1943. A narrow, winding road near the Liri Valley. Visibility is partially obscured by the low-hanging morning mist. Lieutenant Harmon's 3 M10s are perfectly concealed, 2 dug into firing positions in an olive grove above the road, the third positioned further back to provide overwatch and coordinate the retreat. Their engines are cold. The crews are waiting silently, listening for the grind of tracks on the ancient stone. The Italian patrol arrived with an audible confidence. The leading Semovente, a low-slung, heavily armored vehicle, rounded a bend. Its commander focused only on the road ahead, oblivious to the high ground. The American gunners had zeroed in on the exact spot where the Italian armor would be fully exposed. The geometry of the valley floor ensured the M10s had a clean, unobstructed shot at the Italian flanks, the Achilles heel of any armored vehicle. This was not a fair fight. It was an execution based on superior tactical positioning. Harmon gave the silent, almost imperceptible signal. The first shot was not from Harmon's gun, but from the M10 designated Copperhead. The high-velocity 3-inch 76 2mm M7 AP round struck the lead Semovente directly in its transmission housing, instantly immobilizing it in the middle of the road. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. Captain Rossi's entire world narrowed to a tunnel of smoke and confusion. Immobilized, they were a stationary target. The Italian radio operator frantically tried to warn the following units, but the suddenness of the attack paralyzed their response. The clock is ticking. T+. 15 seconds. The second M10, Vigilante, fired. The target was the middle Semovente, which had halted. its commander desperately trying to traverse the gun on a non-existent enemy. The round punched through the side sponson, detonating the ready-use ammunition and ripping the top off the vehicle in a violent eruption of flame. One vehicle destroyed. T+45. Seconds. The Italian infantry, realizing the danger, began to scramble for cover, but it was too late. Lieutenant Harmon's M10, having acquired the rear semovente, fired a near-perfect shot. It struck the vehicle near the engine compartment. The engine caught fire immediately, beginning the slow, horrifying cook-off. 2 vehicles confirmed destroyed. T+1 minute 30 seconds. Harmon now turned his attention back to the lead, immobilized semovente. The crew inside was attempting to bail out, but the machine gun fire from Copperhead pinned them down. Harmon's final shot, a decisive strike beneath the gun mantlet, sealed the vehicle's fate. 3 vehicles destroyed. +2 minutes 0 seconds. The M10 crews, adhering strictly to the doctrine, engaged their engines, the roar of the radial engines replacing the smell of cordite. They didn't wait to admire their work or confirm the casualties. They executed a tactical retreat, moving quickly to a pre-planned secondary position 800 meters back, leaving behind a scene of absolute devastation. The entire armored patrol was eliminated in under 2 minutes. The ambush was brutal, swift, and entirely dependent on the M10's lethal combination of an excellent gun, high mobility, and an adaptable crew that had mastered the art of camouflage and concealment. The Italian forces had mocked the Allied tin can. Now the tin can had answered with a terrifying display of surgical lethality. The news of the 2-minute massacre and similar successful M10 ambushes spread through the ranks of the Axis forces in Italy. The mockery stopped. It was replaced by a deep-seated caution bordering on fear. The German and Italian commanders now had to contend not just with Allied artillery and infantry, but with a weapon that could appear, strike, and vanish, forcing them to adopt a defensive posture. The M10, initially designed as a response to the German Blitzkrieg, became an engine of strategic paralysis. Its very existence forced German armor to slow down, to dedicate significant resources to flank protection, and to spend hours scouting for hidden tank destroyer positions before any advance. This was the ultimate irony of the M10 doctrine. It succeeded not because of its frontal protection, but because its lack of it forced the crews to become masters of the ambush, turning the hunters into the hunted. The statistical data from the Italian campaign bears this out. While the overall number of German and Italian tanks destroyed by M10s might not have surpassed those destroyed by Allied tanks, the impact of those kills was disproportionate. The M10 often targeted command vehicles or vehicles advancing through choke points, causing maximum disruption. A German perspective, Lieutenant Colonel Otto Kraus, a veteran panzer officer now fighting in the Apennine Mountains, recorded his evolving perspective on the American tin can. Kraus, diary entry January 1944. "We no longer laugh at the M10. The crews are clearly trained to accept the risk. They are reckless with their armor because they do not rely on it. They rely on their eyes and their skill with the cannon. Every movement, every ridgeline, every curve in the road must now be scrutinized. We lose valuable minutes of daylight ensuring our flanks are secure, time that the Americans use to consolidate their gains. Their light armor has forced a heavy response, slowing our entire operation." This forced evolution led to a tactical doctrine shift on the German side: never commit armor without heavy infantry screening. This neutralized the German advantage of rapid surprise armored thrusts, the very heart of the Blitzkrieg. The tall, open turret, once a symbol of vulnerability, became a symbol of aggression, enabling faster target acquisition and communication within the crew. The American crews, now seasoned veterans, embraced their role. They understood that the M10 was not a tank, but a heavy-caliber rifle on tracks. They enhanced their vehicles with makeshift armor, sandbags, concrete slabs, anything to boost confidence, but they never abandoned the shoot-and-scoot principle. The open top, which allowed Italian mortar shrapnel to be a constant threat, also made it easier for the crews to communicate and escape a compromised vehicle. Harmon, reflecting on the change: "We realized the M10 was like a snake. It had to strike and retreat. It couldn't coil and defend. Kasserine taught us that lesson in blood. Italy taught us how to be the snake. We stopped worrying about the armor and focused on the first shot, because in the M10, if you miss the first shot, you might not get a second. The narrative now shifts toward the ultimate test, the Allied breakout from the beachheads, and the final confrontations with the remaining German heavy armor in the push towards Rome. The M10, the ugly duckling of the Allied armored force, was now ready to take on the most formidable tanks the Wehrmacht could field. By mid-1944, the M10 Wolverine was indeed beginning its operational transition. The arrival of the M36 Jackson, armed with the devastating, signaled the next evolution in American tank killing. Yet, the tactical footprint of the M10 remained indelible. It was the M10 that refined the tank destroyer doctrine under the harshest conditions, teaching the Allied forces how to fight an aggressive, flexible counter-armor war against a heavily armored, deeply entrenched enemy. The climax of the M10's story often occurred not just in one decisive clash, but in the frantic, decentralized fighting following the Normandy landings, where they faced the fearsome Panther and even the occasional Tiger. However, it was Italy that provided the crucial, bloody training ground. The transition from a flawed vehicle concept to a lethal weapon system was achieved through the sheer grit and adaptability of its crews, forcing them to adhere to a discipline no tank crew required. The M10 was rightly criticized for its slow, hand-cranked turret traverse, a fatal flaw in a close-quarters rotating brawl. Its traverse speed of approximately 24 degrees per second was laughably slow compared to the power traverse of enemy tanks. But in the specialized Italian ambush scenario, this was a non-issue. The doctrine demanded that the gun be aimed primarily by the driver, maneuvering the entire hull, ensuring the vehicle was always pointed in the direction of the escape, ready to unleash its high-velocity armor-piercing HVAP shot and immediately displace. The slow turret became a tactical constraint that enforced strategic discipline. The M10 Wolverine never attained the legendary, often tragic status of the Sherman or the iconic heavy dread of the Tiger. Its contribution was far more fundamental, almost philosophical. It proved that in armored warfare, the power of doctrine and human ingenuity could overcome superior armor, and that tactics could trump raw technology. It forced the German army to fight on Allied terms, slowing their advances, creating congestion, and exposing their flanks to the swift, precise strikes of the hidden predator. The M10's M7 3-inch gun, initially capable of penetrating around 88 of vertical armor at $1,000 yards, was formidable, but not invincible. It was the later introduction of the tungsten-cored M93 APCR, armor-piercing composite rigid rounds, that truly unlocked the M10's potential, allowing it to penetrate 135 mm of armor at the same distance. The threat was not just the vehicle, it was the ammunition being delivered by crews who knew exactly where and when to strike. The very design of the M10, tall and turreted, was a product of American mass production, built quickly on the M4 Sherman chassis. Over $4,900 M10s were produced, ensuring that these tank destroyers were omnipresent on the front lines. This industrial scale, combined with its flexible deployment, meant the Germans never knew where the next ambush would spring. The M10's lasting psychological effect was its insistence on the fluidity of battle. German commanders, accustomed to the slow, methodical advance of their own heavy armor, were constantly paranoid about the ghost of the M10 lurking on their flanks. This paranoia manifested as a massive drain on resources, more reconnaissance patrols, more infantry screeners, and slower rates of advance. The ultimate success of the M10 was not its kill count, but its strategic friction. It bought crucial hours and days for the Allied infantry, logistics and supply lines moving up the rugged Italian peninsula. The memory of the M10 is not one of a hero charging across open ground, its $400 horsepower radial engine roaring in defiance. Rather, it is the image of a camouflaged muzzle waiting patiently in the shadows of a ruined Italian farmhouse, the crew shivering in their open turret, listening to the enemy approach. The sound associated with the M10 is not the heavy roar of a tank engine, but the sharp, shocking crack of the .3 in gun-firing its armor-piercing round, a sound so distinct it was often mistaken for an artillery piece at first, followed by the immediate panicked scramble of the vehicle and its crew melting back into the terrain, leaving only smoke and confusion for the enemy. The M10 set the stage for all future tank destroyer designs and anti-armor doctrine, validating the idea of a dedicated, high-velocity hunter that prioritized offense over protection. The true legacy of the M10 is not measured in the number of tanks it destroyed, but in the number of times it successfully slowed down and frustrated a superior German armored force, turning their heavy metal advantage into a logistical liability. It was the weapon that proved that the American soldier was a fast and terrifying learner, forging mastery from the ashes of Tunisia. They mocked the Allied tank destroyer as a tin can, a flimsy, desperate experiment built on a schedule. But when that tin can vanished into the smoke and dust, leaving behind a burning armored patrol, like the Italian column near the Liri Valley, the laughter stopped instantly. It was replaced by the cold, heavy silence of fear and the grinding gears of a fundamental strategic shift that helped win the war in the tight, unforgiving valleys of Italy. The M10 Wolverine, the hunter that fought not with tons of steel, but with cunning, velocity, and the brutal power of disciplined doctrine. Did this story of adaptation, technological utilization, and strategic genius change how you view tank warfare? If you appreciate the deep technical and human stories behind history's most pivotal conflicts, subscribe to our channel for more documentaries like this. Leave a comment below. What was the most underrated and strategically significant weapon of World War II?